From uprising to elections to continued street protests. 4 years on from calls for greater political freedoms in Bahrain. Has the path to reform hit a roadblock or perhaps a dead end? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm David Foster. Welcome to this edition of Inside Story. Bahrain's drawing criticism from allies and adversaries alike as renewed protests worsen tensions that have gripped the Gulf Kingdom since the 2011 uprising. Well, the latest demonstrations are calling for the release of Bahrain's main opposition leader, Sheikh Ali Salman, who's been held for a week, accused of trying to overthrow the monarchy by force. His detention's been condemned by the US and Iran, the latter accusing Bahrain of bullying its people. Bahrain denounced what it called some countries' double standards and irresponsible statements. The regional and international fallout's adding to the challenges faced by Bahrain as it responds to calls for reform. But what, if anything, has changed since 2011? Al Jazeera's Charles Stratford helps set up our discussion.
It's been nearly 4 years since pro-democracy protests started in Bahrain. Demonstrations by the country's Shia majority population calling for greater political rights as part of the so-called Arab Spring. The Shia opposition groups say their demands have still not been met. The latest violence started after the arrest last week of opposition leader Sheikh Ali Salman. The government accused him of inciting hatred. The US says Ali Salman's arrest could inflame an already tense situation.
We had good statement by Human Rights High Commissioner in Geneva, whom they said Sheikh Ali Salman need to be released immediately, while the European countries, they keep silent and they were talking only about the fair trial. We as an opposition and Al-Wifaq and other political parties also, we issued non-violence declaration and we keep the country in safe for the past 4 years, but still the Bahraini people, they are demanding for their freedom and democracy and to have a prime minister to be elected, not a prime minister to be appointed since 1971.
There have been repeated talks between the opposition and the government over the last 4 years to try and end the unrest. But last year, negotiations collapsed. The main Shia opposition parties boycotted parliamentary elections. Protesters are also angry over the decision to allow the UK to open a military base in Bahrain. The country is already home to the US Fifth Fleet. Bahrain's human rights groups say children have been among many people arrested in the last few days. The United Nations Human Rights Office says it is concerned about the detention of the opposition leader and that a potentially lengthy prison sentence could spark more violence across the country. Charles Stratford, Al Jazeera.
Now to our discussion. I'm going to begin with Justin Gengler from Qatar University. He completed the first ever mass survey of political attitudes in Bahrain. You've written a lot about it in recent weeks. How do you believe things have changed between 2011 and the protests that we know were put down and the protests now, which has seen this senior opposition leader jailed?
I think it depends who you ask. I think the root of the problem in Bahrain is that you have a government who's promulgating or attempting to promulgate this message that things have changed, that Bahrain has turned the corner, that reforms have been implemented, that remaining protests are really at the hands of extremist groups that are refusing to participate in the political process, whereas the opposition says, look, at the end of the day, none of the things that we demanded in 2011 have been implemented, and so why should we go back to formal participation in Parliament?
Specifically what things have not been implemented? Because we have seen parliamentary elections. What hasn't?
Sure. So I think the demand by the opposition was not simply to have elections, but to have elections with, for example, fair electoral districts. There was hope following a announcement by the Crown Prince's Court later in 2014 that there would be fair electoral districts, that this redistricting that the opposition had been calling for the last 3 years would finally come to fruition. In the end, the government announced a unilateral redrawing of districts that changed nothing from the opposition standpoint. In fact, the target of those districts were Sunni Islamist groups, especially in the context of ISIS and the concern over the empowerment of.
And what particularly was the catalyst? Was it the fact that it was felt that the elections were a sham, perhaps that the UK was able to say it was going to have its naval base out there? Maybe that caused the anger. What was the real spark this time around?
The spark for the electoral
protests.
The protests, I think, have been really continuing for the last decade, starting in 2001 when the King Hamid, who had only recently taken power, reneged on a lot of promises. So in 1999, when he came to power, he said, I'm going to liberalize the country. I'm going to institute a unicameral legislature with real legislative powers. That never happened. For the next 10 years, the opposition simmered. And when the Arab Spring got started in other countries, Bahrainis took the.
But more recently, Justin, it simmered from 2011 for a period of time. There were trials, there were prison sentences handed down. But what brought this very latest set of protests about?
The arrest of the opposition leader Ali Salman, who is the Secretary General of the opposition. In fact, was only re-elected as Secretary General, not coincidentally, only 2 days before his arrest. And so I think the impression by most activists is that this was punishment for Al-Wafaq's refusal to participate in the parliamentary elections. The government had said there would be consequences, and in fact, the Justice Ministry had been investigating the society for alleged violations of different laws. And so the view is that this is simply punishment for not having participated in the process that they believe was flawed.
If I can sum up at this point in the programme, the problems have been there all along, but this was the one thing that brought it all to a boil, yes?
Yes, and it was also the first time that a senior opposition leader had been directly targeted for detention and sustained arrest.
We're naturally keen to get government perspective. On the phone now from Bahrain is Adel Al-Mawada, member of the Shura Council. That's Bahrain's upper house, appointed directly by the king. Why arrest this man, this leader of the opposition, if it was quite likely, and it had been pointed out by a number of people that it would be likely to cause trouble?
In fact, it is a matter of law and order. It is not the leader of opposition or any party is not wanted because he is from this group or the other. It is a matter of, a law that should be taken, and I think it is a matter of investigations now. They are investigating on few things. There is no charges yet. And I think any country has the right to ask and to know what is going on in the country. Disturbance will happen if others do not like the law to take and order to take its place.
But why, if your best friend in the world internationally, and I would have to say that is the United States, has been very close to Bahrain for many years now, why, if the United States says it is extremely concerned, this is the quote, worried that such an action will work against establishing a favourable climate in the country and its progress towards comprehensive and effective political action? Now, to hear that from the United States is quite something, isn't it?
It is, but the strange thing is not the question of the United States, because it is very clear that United States is playing double standard everywhere, and you know it more than me. They know they are doing the same in their country when it feels that there is security for their countries, and they break the laws as well, the laws that they put themselves, the human rights laws and the other laws. But when it comes to others, I think they are trying to put gas in the flame more than it is.
Perhaps they are just reflecting.
On the other side, they are saying you have all the rights to fight terror and to fight what danger comes to you.
But perhaps they're just reflecting other people's concerns about the illegitimacy of the elections. For example, threats to people that if they didn't vote, they wouldn't be able to get government jobs and the like of that.
Excuse me, this is something that nobody believes in. Nobody is affected because he boycotted or he didn't vote. In fact, nobody knows who voted and who didn't vote. And in our country, there is no one has been blamed not for voting. They have the right to vote, and they have the right to not to vote and to express themselves. It has nothing to do with that at all.
So how have things changed in the last 3-4 years since the political upheaval of 2011? What have you done to change the climate there?
So many things have changed a lot, that changed in the country. But unfortunately, there are a part of the opposition who cannot see anything unless they are told.
Well, give us examples.
Then they will believe it.
Give us examples of what's changed.
There is so many. 14 constitution amendments has been made. Do you know them?
No, I'm asking you to tell me.
I told you. You don't know that there are 14 constitution amendments have been made now, and you say nothing. What you have just mentioned now, and you said the upper house, it's no more the upper house now. I was a parliament member for 12 years, elected parliament members. Now I'm in the Shura Council. And now the superiority is being changed to the elected ones is superior than the appointed one now. If you don't know that about these changes, then take our word for it.
What about a direct election of the Prime Minister? That was one of the key demands, wasn't it?
It is our business. We don't want elected Prime Minister. You choose the system you want in your country. Everybody chooses the system he wants in his country, and we chose this system.
But this is part of the problem, is it not, sir? The system has been chosen by...
It is not a problem. Why it is a problem in Bahrain?
Because the system that you're talking about has been chosen, if you like, imposed by a minority of the people in Bahrain, by Sunni, when there's a majority Shia population. The Shia, by and large, as we've seen from the demonstrations, don't like that.
This is nonsense. You know very well that in the elections, it's 51%, more than 51% who elected. And usually, it is not 100% who votes. So out of the, say, 60, 70 who votes, there is 51% who have participated in elections. Whom are you talking about? We are not presenting Iran. We are presenting Bahrain.
What do you make of what was called the national dialogue, described as a framework for negotiations between the government and political groupings, among them El Wifaq, the party from which this arrested man comes? In fact, he is the leader. Where does the national dialogue stand now?
It has already been taken. There are so many things has been amended according to the national dialogue, and because of that, system has changed now. Even in the government, the parliament has nothing to do with the government. Now the parliament has to pass the program of the government, which is a big amendment in the whole region, not in Bahrain. It is in the whole region. There is nothing like this. And you know very well that democracy and changes and amendments are building up a process. And that is what's happening in Bahrain. We will not do it the way the West is telling us. We will do it the way that we think it is better for us.
OK, let me just ask you this finally at this stage in the programme. Bahrain is caught geographically and perhaps politically and ideologically between Saudi Arabia on the one hand and Iran on the other. In 2011, Saudi troops, although they weren't directly called that, they were called Operation Peninsula, GCC forces, but Saudi troops went across the causeway at the height of the demonstrations. Is it not fair to say that you are still particularly worried about Iranian influence with the opposition groups, and that's what this is about?
It is not, that is what it is about, but you are right. Always worried about Iran influence on others and the way it plays against others. It is always a worrying subject. But this has nothing to do with that.
Mr. Al-Muadha, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate you taking the time. I know you're on a journey at the moment and you stopped to talk to us. We thank you very much indeed. OK, now the opposition perspective on events in Bahrain. From our London studios, we have Ali Al-Aswad, member of the Al-Wifaq National Islamic Society, former opposition MP. And we saw you earlier in the programme in Charles Stratford's report. I want to ask you now, it's been put to me during the course of this programme that the leader of Al-Wifaq was arrested because of criminal intent that he had. If a country fears something like that, is it not right to investigate it?
Well, I mean, there is right to the country to investigate it, but they know exactly why they are investigating it right now, at this time, at this moment, which it comes after the Wifaq General Assembly election, when they elect the Secretary General again. And the governments in Bahrain, they had intention to take an action against the Wifaq Secretary General at early stage, but they were postponing it after this election. And we've been told you have two options, either to change the Secretary General, or we will smash and we will crack down Wifaq, and we will crack down also your movements. Unfortunately, this is the reality.
Who says this sort of thing to you?
The governments, through their proxies and through their also Western allies, high diplomat members in Bahrain and outside Bahrain.
Well, be a bit more specific. I mean, if it's their allies, if it's other governments elsewhere, tell us who's saying this to you.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned now, high diplomat, they were telling us, you will be at risk if you don't participate in the elections. And we were asking them, and we was asking them what's going to happen. They said, your Secretary General should not be stayed in his position. You should be participating. And we said, okay, what is the minimum? What the government is going to give to the opposition as the minimum? They said nothing, but participate in the election. Otherwise, you will be smashed. The whole thing will be cracked down, and you will be responsible for that. In fact, the governments, they are responsible for what they are doing right now. In fact, the West, their silence is their responsibility of what is happening right now. The violence is going to be escalated, and it is not under our control. We were controlling the country for the past 4 years, and we were telling this to the West and to the Bahraini governments, and they know exactly what was our role.
Let me ask you about the specific point that was raised by the man we interviewed, who's a member of the Shura Council.
Now they are talking, sorry about this, I just need to mention this. Now they are talking about Wifaq itself. They are talking about implementing the law against Wifaq. Might be freezing, might be closed.
We had a member of the Shura Council on a short while ago. He said that there'd been 14 constitutional changes, many of which were at the instigation of the request of the opposition. Can you name one change that you think in the last 4 years has been beneficial in bringing about the ends that you want?
I mean, to be honest, these changes were addressed by the opposition party in the parliament in 2008. And your guest, he knew clearly when we addressed these amendments to the constitution, and was rejected by the whole parliament, and by remote control they were accepting those 14 amendments. The implementation of these amendments, it's not going to do a dramatic change to the parliament. There will not be full. We were aiming and demanding the parliaments with full of power to give the authority to the parliament as an upper house, not to the appointed Shura members or Shura councils, and to approve the budget of the country. That was one of the things we were talking about. But in reality, when you go and investigate it, you will see everything as per the royal court. What they need, they are implementing it in the parliaments, in the Shura Council as well. There is nothing serious being amendment. There
Hold
is nothing
fire,
serious
if you will,
changes.
Mr. Aswad, for just a couple of minutes, because we're going to come back to Justin Gengler, who's been sitting here listening to both the opposition and, if you like, the establishment position out of Bahrain. Let's go back to what the member of the Shura Council was talking about. You were making notes. When you heard what he had to say, what struck you particularly?
Well, I think one thing that's important to clarify is the stated reason behind Ali Salman's arrest, which is the claim that he said in a speech Al-Wifaq had been instructed by outside parties, or had been advised by outside parties, to take up violence, but it had refused to do so. So he's essentially addressing followers saying, look, some people would have us take up violence, but we've refused to do that. So the government, rather than taking that as a, let's say, a positive, they took it as a negative. Oh, who are these people they're talking to who are advocating violence? And so that is the stated reason for his arrest. So the idea that it had nothing to do with Iran.
And he'd actually said, as you point out, look, sorry, we don't want anything to do with this.
Sure. And so the idea that it doesn't have anything to do with Iran is obviously not true. I think, though, what Mr. Al-Aswad said about the pressure faced by Al-Wafaq is true not only of that society, but also of other societies that have been part of the opposition coalition in Bahrain. One of them is WAD, which is a secular nationalist society and has arguably taken the brunt of government crackdown even more so than Al-Wafaq since the uprising. Its headquarters were literally burned down in the aftermath of the uprising. It was also told that if it did not change, its Secretary General, who's now in prison, that it would be dissolved.
Yeah, Mr. Al-Aswad was mentioning that. I want to ask you about Iranian influence. What Iranian influence is there on the opposition movement there? What does Iran want to get out of social unrest, if you want to call it that, in Bahrain?
I think, in fact, in Bahrain, even in a direct way, so that the majority of Bahrainis are Shia. In fact, most Shia in Bahrain, they looked as their source of religious emulation to Iraq, to Ali Sistani, not to Iran. So I think that's sort of the...
But does Iran want to play with Bahraini affairs?
I mean, it may sort of look from afar and laugh and say, oh, wow, this is something that's a problem for the government and therefore it's good for us. But I think it's not interested and frankly doesn't have the capability of being directly involved. It's now very directly involved in Iraq, in Syria, and in a strategic environment where it's much easier for it to do so. Bahrain is an island, and an island that's very well guarded militarily and under, let's say, very strict surveillance. So it's not clear how exactly Iran could, even if it wanted to, arm the opposition or launch on this armed takeover of the country, a la the Houthis in Yemen. I mean, it's simply not feasible militarily.
Let's go back to London. Mr. Al-Aswad, I was listening to a programme we recorded 4 years ago in which we interviewed a woman doctor, one of those working at the emergency centres in Manama at the time, and she said, this is our golden time, either we grab it now or never. I would imagine 3 years down the line, if she were able to reflect on that, she might think it is never.
Well, I mean, you could say this, but deeply, like if you were following what's happening in Bahrain for the past 4 years, there was a protest every day in Bahrain, according also to the Interior Ministry's record. And they were tweeting like about these protests daily. In fact, we didn't have a coverage in the media. And now we are getting back to the media, to the international media, to cover Bahrain because of what's happening now to our Secretary General, Sheikh Ali Salman, as a peaceful leader in Bahrain, should be respected by the governments and by the also GCC countries. This is the reality. But the Bahraini people, if you look to the history, they never stepped down. They never stopped their movements. We had a history in Bahrain since 1923. We had history in 1956, and we had in the 80s, and we had also in earlier 2000 and until 2011. So the protests never stopped in Bahrain. Now we had also different timing. And
so
we said the Bahraini government should listen.
Will you continue with the national dialogue, which is supposed to bridge the gap between the two sides, but which for maybe the last 2 years has seemingly got nowhere?
It's got nowhere because the offer by the governments, it's nothing. We classify it. It's just the governments in Bahrain, they were trying to buy time to take us to the election of 2014. And after 2014, they would tell us like either take it or leave it. And unfortunately, this is what happened in August. There was a talk, and at a certain time, we have seen like those people from the authority or represent the governments, they were talking to us, and at that time they said, okay, look, we had this, we will amend the changes in the constituencies, but we will never tell you what's going to happen. You might get better representative in the parliaments, and the governments, we are not going to do anything, any changes in the parliaments or in the government.
Mr. Al-Aswad, thank you. I'm sorry, it's just a matter of time. I'm sure we will come back to this. Thank you to my guests. That is Justin Gengler here in Doha. to Ali Al-Aswad. We've just been hearing him talking to us on behalf of the opposition out of London, and to Adel Al-Muwada, who joined us a little bit earlier on from Bahrain, member of the Shura Council. Well, thank you for watching. Please let us know your thoughts. You can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can contact us, if this is your wont, on Twitter. Our handle, as they say, is at AJ Inside Story. From me, David Foster, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now. Look forward to your company on another occasion.